Good afternoon, good morning, depending on the time zone that you might be tuning in from today. Welcome back to another session here at Fintech Nexus. I'm your host and moderator today, Todd Anderson, Chief Content Officer at Fintech Nexus. How to onboard 90% of customers quickly and securely. Before I turn it over to my esteemed guests and panelists, for our conversation today, just a couple of quick announcements. First is, we want your participation as the audience. So at various times during the conversation, hit the Q&A button, just go ahead and input your question. As we move through the conversation, we'll begin to, rope those in. If you have a question, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes in, whenever you have the question, and we'll try to answer as many as we can, depending on time. Also, as a reminder, if you have to drop off at any point, can only watch a portion of this, we will share the recording. So keep a lookout on your email. Usually share pretty quickly within a day or two. So just keep a lookout for that, and we'll get it over to you. Also want to do a special thanks to our speakers, both Nicole and Brandt, as well as to Prove. You've been a long time supporter and sponsor of our various events, both these digital engagements as well as our large scale in-person events. So we appreciate the continued support and partnership. And for anything else related to Fintech Nexus, feel free to go to fintechnexus.com. We have an event coming up in just about 10 days in Miami, our Deal Makers event, which is only meetings, no content. And then we have our large scale USA event, 4,000 plus people, the largest fintech event in New York City, May 10th and 11th at the Javits Center. And now that's enough for me for the time being. Let's turn it over to our guests for some introductions. Nicole, let's pass to you. Nicole Jass, Chief Product Officer at Prove.
Thanks, Todd. Thanks a lot for having me. So as Todd mentioned, I'm Nicole Jass, Chief Product Officer of Prove. I was so excited to join Prove about 2 months ago, so I'm definitely a new Prover. Before this, I ran fraud, identity, loyalty, and checkout products at FIS. So I had a really good purview across really the payments landscape, across merchants and banking, for technologies who were trying to help customers solve problems in that identity and fraud space. And I ran into Prove and found a company that essentially can figure out if it's Nicole on Nicole's phone, right? And if you think about if you can really solve that problem of identity and authentication and really bind that identity to a phone, it can make things like applying for credit, which is what we're going to talk about today, or paying for things, logging in, signing up way easier from a consumer's point of view and way safer from really a business's point of view. So if you don't know much about Prove, it really is a modern way of proving identity. As I mentioned, the secret sauce is really leveraging a mobile phone and connecting an identity to a mobile phone. And what we've been able to do, we're going to talk a lot about today, is not just stop the bad guys. I get way more excited about getting the good guys through. And so that's where you really focus on faster onboarding, more seamless, less things to type in from a consumer's point of view. That's where you can get that less abandonment rate, faster onboarding, and drive actual top line revenue. So rather than just saving money on fraud, it really is, and what I get more excited about is driving that top line revenue. So we work with over 1,000 companies, some of the top banks, great fintechs, and really innovative companies like BILT that I'm excited about. And actually, if you want more information, you can scan the QR code, but I'll hand it over to Brandt to do an introduction.
Thanks, Nicole. Hi, everyone. Brandt Smallwood, head of card here at BILT Rewards. For those of you who are not familiar with BILT, BILT started with the mission of making rent rewarding. So there's over 100 million renters in the country, and today and historically, those renters have spent more than $500 billion every year on rent, and they get to live in the apartment that they're living in, but they don't get a whole lot else from that. As many of you all know, millennials in particular, Gen Z, younger demographics have been renting for longer and longer. So the first-time home buyer nowadays, the median first time is 34 years old. They've rented for 13 years or so. And so we came about to try to address that problem and help users or renters find a path to homeownership, find a path that's faster and easier, and get rewarded along the way. So BILT is a loyalty program for renters. We partner with about 50 of the top property managers across the country, who together manage about 3 million units. And we offer a loyalty program. We give users rewards for paying their rent, and they can use those rewards for a variety of different things, everything from paying their rent the next month to making purchases, everyday purchases at Amazon, redeem them through travel transfers to 14 different airline and hotel partners, or kind of novel to BILT. We spent 1.5 years to get regulatory approval to use those points towards a down payment on a home. So you can save them up, accrue interest on your points over that 13-year time period that you're renting. And when you're ready to buy a home, hopefully a little bit faster with the help of BILT, you can use those points towards your down payment. So that's what BILT is. I run the side of the business focused on consumer finance. So we have a co-branded credit card with Wells Fargo. It's the only credit card that lets you pay rent on your credit card at any property in the country without paying the normal fee. So normally, if you want to pay rent on your credit card, most landlords don't accept it. The small percentage that do charge you 3% as a convenience fee. We've developed technology to allow you to pay rent anywhere on your credit card, earn the rewards that you're used to earning on every other bucket of spend, and not pay those fees. And I run that side of the business. And then lastly, we have a whole bunch of education, tools and services to help users along the way and renters along the way build their path towards homeownership. So we have a free rent reporting service where every on-time rent payment you make will be reported to the credit bureaus if you opt into our service. That'll help you build your credit history faster. So folks who don't have a credit card post-Card Act coming out of college can now find a new path towards building their credit and building it more quickly, hopefully along the way, making that path to homeownership faster and easier, and supporting them with a whole bunch of education and content along the way. I joined BILT about 2 years ago and came from financial services broadly. Relevant perhaps to this conversation was at Marcus by Goldman Sachs on the founding team many years ago.
All right. Well, thank you both, Brandt and Nicole, for those introductions. And Brandt, to kick off our conversation, I'll point to you and go to you first. We're entering, or some might say we're in a tricky economic environment. And obviously companies want to optimize every opportunity to find and acquire new customers. And so when it comes to our topic today in onboarding, what were some of the main pain points that BILT and ultimately you were trying to solve when it came to onboarding new customers?
Yeah, great question. And I like how Nicole put it in her excitement around getting people through, removing friction, and kind of the growth side of the equation, making things easier for customers. I think here at BILT, we're all focused on the customer experience, making it the best, easiest, most frictionless process. And to us, that's the first and foremost important thing. So, there's interesting research. I'm sure you've all read it. A lot of it is intuitive, but a BCG study found that 22 clicks is the average number of clicks folks make to complete a transaction online. On the one hand, 22 clicks is great. That's a lot easier than driving to your bank to fill out a form. It's a lot easier than driving to your local store to buy something. So it's a big improvement from where we've been. And as a result, consumers have less affinity or less need, less stickiness to use a product or service that, historically, if you're at the store already and you have a frustrating experience, you might just, stay there and deal with it. Now you can go somewhere else. So on the one hand, that easiness has made folks go other places and less sticky. On the other hand, it's 22 clicks is a lot. It's a lot to get through something and to do something in today's day and age. So the biggest pain point I think we're focused on, and that we hear from customers and that we're always trying to think about how to solve, is how do you make the sign-up process, how do you make doing anything with BILT as easy as possible? It shouldn't take 22 clicks if you can avoid it. And if you can get 22 clicks to 21 or 20 there's real lift from that, and customers appreciate it. Qualitatively, we hear folks say, wow, that was so easy. I clicked a couple buttons thanks to pre-fill type technologies that Prove has, other autofill capabilities that many devices have. You can kind of get through processes that used to be pretty cumbersome very quickly. So that's first and foremost our biggest focus. I think it's interesting, Todd, that you bring up the economy, because obviously there's an economic component to all of this. I think it comes in two folds, which I'm sure is quite obvious, but one is, how do you get more customers through the funnel, reducing friction, preventing folks from getting false positives when you're running various types of KYC and fraud checks and things like that. But also on the expense side, obviously, how do you prevent fraud from happening and the fraud expense that comes with that? How do you reduce the cost of a whole bunch of different vendors or a whole bunch of different solutions to solve the problem? So I think for us, Prove was a great and is a great sort of happy medium. It's one of the few, I'm sure we'll talk a lot about this as we go, but one of the few, possibly the only fraud solution that we have that actually has the customer experience element that doesn't add friction, actually reduces friction. So we love that aspect about Prove. And I think both aspects are important. Getting more folks through the funnel and reducing costs along the way, particularly fraud costs, are going to be extremely important heading into this environment.
Nicole, I mean, obviously Brandt went through some of the stuff that's important to them, as you mentioned in your intro, working with 1,000 different companies, both big banks, small banks, big fintechs, small fintechs. Is that a pretty fair understanding of the pain points generally, or are there some others that you can share that kind of expand on what Brandt initially brought up?
Yeah, thanks, Todd. No, I think Brandt nailed it, and it really is a balancing act, and usually it's a trade-off, right? Like usually the person who's trying to drive acquisition is like kind of fighting with the person who's trying to drive down fraud, because it seems like so many times you'd have to do some kind of a step up, or to make this thing more secure, I'm going to have to add friction to the process, and so it usually it is a bit of a trade-off. And I think the magic is the ability to create make something that's more secure. Reduces the fraud, but actually drives a better customer experience. I think from a trend standpoint, as you mentioned, the economy, like fraud goes up, right? And fraudsters are clever, right? They get really, they're very clever. And I think one of the things we have here is water always finds the cracks, right? And so, and that's what we find with fraud, right? It doesn't ever just kind of go away. It just evolves. And so I think, that's something that we're preparing ourselves more for. It's something that happens to help our business, right? Is when there is more fraud, because we can solve the problem. But it's definitely a trend that we're seeing in the marketplace, and where I think the solution comes into play, and the way that BILT has launched the solution and implemented the solution is balancing, not even just having to strike a balance, right? But be able to have that frictionless step up process.
Do you think, as a follow-up to that, I mean, you both mentioned it in your intros, and then Brandt kind of expanded on a little bit when he went into that first question, which is, do you think too many people and too many companies think of fraud as only stopping a bad actor versus some of those trade-offs that you mentioned? And is that mindset need to change, where it's not just bad actors, but how can we improve the experience for the good actor, the good customer, and someone that wants to come back to us?
Yeah, just jumping in first, I think it's definitely both, and it needs to be both. And to Nicole's point, it shouldn't be a fight. Obviously, there is that tension and that balance. But what we spend a lot of time thinking about is, if you're stopping one good person for every fraudster you stop, that's a really bad outcome. You want every single good person to get through and no bad people, and that's what we're all striving for. And I think it's interesting in the credit card landscape in particular, as it's relevant to BILT. when you think about the opportunities to stop people up front and then over the life cycle, there's a lot of tools that you have. So you can make those trade-offs. And I think each business, each product is going to have a different calculus, but you don't necessarily have to stop every bad person up front if you can then monitor how they behave after the fact, how they interact with their account, how they use their account and so forth, and stop the bad behaviors down the road. But I think, we're certainly focused on that tension, and for BILT, customer experience is top of mind.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I think the more companies look at fraud as kind of less of a black and white issue, and I'm going to treat all my customers the same, right? There's folks who kind of quickly you can see that they're a good customer, quickly you can see that they're a bad actor, but there's a lot of gray, right? And I think part of what you want to do is create friction just for the gray. So when you can identify someone as, hey, I know who this person is, I've verified it's their phone and it's them on their phone, like just shoot them through. If something looks a little funny and there's an off signal, that's where you want to do step up. And so I think that's how we see a lot of the great companies approaching, fraud and onboarding, is creating multiple flows. And so in this example, if I'm not a good guy, I'm probably going to say, hey, don't pre-fill my stuff because I don't want you knowing my phone or sniffing my phone or anything like that. So there's maybe more, friction that we may want to put into those kind of manual flows, as opposed to those who opt in. And we see, more than 90% of people will actually choose to say, yeah, pre-fill, right? I am a good person. I do want you to go ahead and grab my information, make this easier for me. But if they're going to use a manual process, if we see a bad signal there, then it creates an opportunity for us to add friction in the right places, and not for the folks who just want to shoot right through and are leveraging all the right information.
As a reminder to the audience, if you have any questions, just use the Q&A function in your Zoom window. Go ahead and input a question or multiple questions, and we'll go ahead and get to those questions as we continue to move through our conversation here. Shifting a little bit away from kind of the broader trends and more about the specific case study and what brought you together and how you work together in terms of your brands. Brandt, obviously you've successfully implemented some of the technology related to Prove and the onboarding. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you guys did this and ultimately some of the successes that you're seeing?
Yeah, definitely. So I think, to use Nicole's phrase again, that water finds the cracks. I think, fraud has gotten more and more sophisticated, and every day it gets more sophisticated. And the old tools of matching certain elements of information you enter in an application, so name versus address versus, phone number and things like that, are helpful and are important tools, but they're not be all end all anymore in a way that, historically they might have been. And fraud has gotten, figured out ways to get around those types of issues and those types of checks. So we've found it extremely important to keep leveling up and deploying tools that are more sophisticated. Prove has been one of those tools. And what we find so powerful about Prove is it does a lot of those kind of, identity element checking, checking your phone number and so forth to your profile and known information about you. But it also validates possession of your device. So not only as a fraudster do you need to know the information, but you have to prove that you actually have access to the phone that's being entered. And that's a pretty powerful tool to stop fraudsters. I think on top of that, some of the additional features Prove has to, be able to tell when SIM swapping or suspicious behaviors behind the scenes have happened are really powerful as well for the most sophisticated types of fraud. So, we found Prove to be a solution that does things that many other solutions can't do, or that would take multiple different, tools to do, a separate OTP plus a separate identity check and so forth. And so that was a pretty, from a fraud prevention perspective, a pretty big reason why we said, hey, Prove is a really attractive tool to use. I think what was what made the decision easy was what we talked about earlier of, and they pre-fill. Like, we are all about reducing the friction. And so to have a tool that reduces friction and stops fraud is amazing. The last element I would say is, when we came to Prove and we heard about Prove, we at BILT are really a year and a half old since we launched our product. So we sort of measure things kind of like in dog years, but maybe it's more like fruit fly years. A week is a really long time for us, and months is like an eternity. So as a consequence of that, it was really important to find a partner that could move quickly with us and that we would be able to implement and use quickly. So with Prove, from the time we started talking to them to the time we were able to go live, it was less than a week, which I think for many companies and for many services out there is unheard of. And as we evaluated other sources and other providers, that was a common kind of friction point. Folks measure things in months and quarters rather than days and weeks, and Prove's ability to move quickly and to make the implementation easy so that not only could they move quickly, but we could implement it quickly was extremely important to us.
I mean, to pick up on your last point there, I mean, how critical can that be to spin something up that quickly? I mean, especially we're going into a tricky economic environment. You both have mentioned during this call already, fraudsters are getting better at everything they do as well. And so to be able to find a partner, work with them, and then all of a sudden within a week, you already have something out there. I mean, that's pretty agile as compared to some of the either other stuff out there, or just generally speaking, how long it might take to implement and do things. How critical can it be to your business, your bottom line, and ultimately to stopping some of those bad people and letting through the good ones when you can do it in that rapid of a timeline?
Yeah. And I think the answer probably depends broadly. If pre-fill were the main thing, then a week versus 2 weeks, you'll lose some amount of whatever pickup you're getting and reduced friction. You'll lose that many folks over that week. So it kind of depends on volume, but it's not probably the most critical thing. When it comes to fraud, I think it is extremely critical. Fraud is fast. And if you see something, if you see some sort of new fraud angle come, you have usually a few different levers you can pull. And there are certain levers that are pretty brute force that really negatively impact folks and that you may not want to do. So to have more sophisticated solutions that you can implement and to be able to do that quickly lets you continue to deliver the customer experience you want to deliver without, allowing yourself or having to accept a whole bunch of fraud. So I think the speed was extremely important for us to be able to implement this tool and use it quickly. The other thing I would say is Prove has been flexible as well in terms of their approach to how you can implement them. So we chose to do a direct implementation, but I know they're available through some of the platforms out there. So for folks who are integrated already with, say, an Alloy or something like that, you can turn a switch on and use Prove, pretty quickly, which is another great way to kind of move quickly.
We had a question come in from Kevin in our audience, one that actually was kind of came to mind for me as well. And Nicole, I'll ask it in a way that's a little bit different in terms of the way Kevin asked it, but ultimately not everyone that decides to not pre-fill is automatically a fraudster. Yeah. And it's kind of, the way I would ask the question is friction always bad? And is there a point at which, too little friction is ultimately bad for an organization?
Yeah, no, great question. I think, gosh, I'd love to hear Brandt's thoughts on this too. I'm not sure that friction is ever a good thing from my consumer hat, but if you can keep the fraud down, right? And so I think to answer your question, most of the people who would manually go through it are still good, right? Like when we have fraud problems, like fraud is usually measured in BIPs, which means it's a fraction of a percentage. And so you shouldn't assume that everyone who says, no, don't take my data and pre-fill it is bad. And like I said, most of them are actually good, right? They just aren't sure about the process and want to go through the flow. Like I said, we've seen 93% of people want to pre-fill. So to answer your question, no, most of them are still good. And then what you can do is, as you're thinking through solutions, do obviously the normal data checks. There's things that we can do behind the scenes, even if you don't pre-fill, to make sure that the information we can, verify identity, make sure that the user is still tied to their phone. So there's definitely things that you can do, right? And they are still good, but we see, 3 to 5 times the fraud come through the channels when they do manually versus when they pre-fill. And part of that is self-selection, but also some of the checks that we do in the background.
Yeah, I echo those sentiments. I think for the 99.9% of folks that come to you, they're good actors and they want to use your product, and creating as frictionless of an experience for them as possible is the dream. I think we think of friction in a couple ways, and so I think those ideas aren't necessarily out of touch, where some customers view pre-fill as friction, and they view it as friction not because they really want to, or somehow reducing the number of fields that they fill in is harder for them, but to kind of what Nicole alluded to, they just feel uncomfortable. It's a new technology, or they're not really sure how you got the data or whatever. From our experience, it's a pretty limited subset that kind of approaches in that way. But for some folks, it just is friction because they're uncomfortable with it, and typing in their address isn't that hard, and especially with Google form fill and whatever, it still can be a pretty easy process. So they're okay with that. So I think we strive not to put in friction. I think it's an interesting question, kind of intellectual question, Todd, because I'm sure there are places where you think about preventing various types of fraud in particular, where friction is helpful, even just the friction. But I think we look at trying to build the experience for the 99.9% of folks that are good, and then figure out how to address that small population of fraudsters and keep them out.
There was a few more questions have come in, and obviously to the audience, if you have questions, feel free to continue to input them. We're getting them pretty fast and furious at the moment. Nicole, there's a part of this question I want to ask to you, which is, there are obviously different levels of fraud: first party, second party, third party, or different classes of fraud. Excuse me. Is Prove solution focusing on third party? How do you answer that question in terms of from the audience?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess I would look at it, yes, first party fraud. It is really me. I'm just going to tell you it wasn't me later. Synthetic fraud. I'm going to go actually make up an identity, build an identity over time, and maybe on like day 91 start like actually using the identity. Or third party is I'm going to go pretend to be Todd, right? So Prove actually addresses all of them in different ways. So, if you think about synthetic fraud, if you're going to go build up an identity, we combat that by actually knowing that possession. We build a reputation score around how long have you had your phone. Is this a new phone, burner phone? So we actually have ways to mitigate and identify synthetic fraud to know if it is a real identity and what kind of a reputation and history the identity has. Third-party fraud, again, because you basically have to steal my phone. So if you can go out there and steal a bunch of phones and pretend to be someone and then actually use biometrics to log in, so that you create so much friction and what it would take to break the system, so we can address that third-party fraud. First-party fraud, because again, you can come back and say, hey, if I come back and say, hey, that really wasn't me who applied for that card, we have proof that it was you on your phone. And so a lot of the times we're not enacting that just yet and maybe leveraging that kind of data. But that is something that Prove could do in working with the customer, is essentially to go back and prove well, it was you on your phone. But a lot of times, when you have disputes and resolutions, part of that is how the company would want to handle that kind of a complaint. But we have ways to prove that it was them.
I wanted to shift a little bit, and Nicole, I know that in terms of this presentation, we have some visuals. If you can give the audience a sense for what this process might look like, and so I'll pass the baton to you for a couple minutes here. If you can give them a bit of an overview on kind of how some of this might work, and give them some visual examples.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks. So first of all, what you're seeing, and this is just a generic flow. I think Brandt mentioned it's fully configurable. So it's essentially leverage our APIs, and it's the UX that BILT has, or in this example, a made up company, First Street Bank. But essentially what I would do on my phone is I'm going to hit sign up now to start an application. There's two flows. What we're showing here is if I'm on the wireless network, we actually can pick up your phone number. We're going to want you to validate. So we'll have you put in your birthday. You can also put in the last word of your social. And that's just for us as a verification to make sure that we have the right phone number tied to the right identity. You hit continue. And at that point, we're going to pre-fill the data. So we give the consumer a chance to make sure it's right? Like, have you moved? Is the address different? Is the phone number? It should be the right phone number because you've either given it to us or we've found it through the wireless carrier, but we give the consumer a chance to make an addition. You'll also see on here that in this example, we've asked for email address. That's configurable. So if the customer decides they want to collect additional information, like an email address or not, they have a chance to add it. And then essentially you're done. What we've done in the background here isn't just pick up the information, but we can actually, leverage KYC. We've done identity verification. Like I mentioned before, we have a process called Pro, where we know that you're in possession of the device, the reputation of the device, how long you've had it, and that you're actually the owner of the device. So there's just things that we've done in the background that you don't have to know about, that we've done to make sure that this is a good identity and we're comfortable passing it along to the customer. The one thing I would also mention on here while we're on here is this is what we would consider a really strong bind. So event. So if I'm signing up for something, we've gone through, pre-filled the information, you've gone through our processes and all of our checks. That's what we would consider a bind. And we can go into some pretty sophisticated authentication flows here, even into like passwordless and some of the new stuff that Prove is working on. Because that's, an authentication is only as good as that initial bind. And this presents a really, really interesting opportunity for us to bind an identity to an account and create that authentication moment using something like biometrics or like a FIDO type solution behind the scenes.
We did have while you're on this screen, we had a question come in, from someone in our audience. Does Prove support both browser and native mobile, or native mobile only?
Yeah, no, great question. We can support both use cases. Again, leveraging our APIs, you can include it into whatever kind of flows and experiences that you want. And inside of that app experience, that's actually where a new solution Prove Auth can be leveraged to then take this directly into a passwordless, like set up an account without a password, and be able to leverage like the biometrics on a phone for login.
Another question here. How do you balance reducing friction by pre-filling for the consumer and pre-fill data accuracy?
Yeah, so I think part of what you see here, and this might have been asked before the flow, is that we are giving the consumer a chance to change it, right? You might have moved like last week, and we, there may be something that you need to fix. And so I would say that that's part of how you balance it, is that we don't just like go right through and you don't get to see it and verify it, that we do want the consumer and the customer to make sure that they're verifying the information.
We have some more questions coming in from the audience. And obviously, if anyone else has additional questions, feel free to keep them coming. To Brandt, is your business case for Prove based on increasing funnel efficiency alone, Or do you have to include loss reduction due to fraud to make the financials work?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think, for us and our implementation and business case for Prove came from a fraud standpoint. So fraud is the bad thing about fraud is, unless you work in the fraud business, is that it's pretty easy to justify spending money and spending resources on fraud prevention. So it's a pretty easy business case for us to justify. Like I said, Prove also does replace the need for multiple different vendors that you might have otherwise had in place, which helps that case as well. If you're paying, smaller amounts to multiple different parties to do the same thing, or to do a similar thing on the fraud prevention side, it helps that Prove has a kind of all-in-one solution. The pre-fill piece, I don't have a lot of data to share off the cuff on it in terms of pickup and the kind of economic benefit of that. I think, much like a lot of things in trying to optimize the customer experience in the UX, it can sometimes be hard to quantify. And if you're solely looking to build a business case on, hey, I removed one field in the application, what did that do? Or I pre-filled X fields, what did that do? It can be an analytical exercise with a bunch of assumptions. But I think the nice thing about Prove is, to Nicole's point earlier, and what we've talked a lot about, is you don't have to choose between, am I spending money on something that improves the customer experience, or am I spending money on something that reduces fraud? You can justify the expense by the fraud prevention alone, and you get the added benefit of it makes the experience better.
Another question from our audience: does BILT still collect government issued IDs and verify the document as well?
So we have, and I won't get into too much detail. We have a relatively sophisticated flow. BILT also does not do 100% of it on the BILT side. So the BILT Mastercard, with respect to that product, is issued by Wells Fargo. So they have a whole variety of checks and normal type of underwriting that they would do, and they make that decision. In terms of our sign-up flow, we follow a path much like Nicole suggested, which is, if there's very high confidence that you're a good person, we try to make it as frictionless as possible. If we're a little unsure and the data is questionable, or you can't pass Prove for whatever reason or whatever it is, there's various different step-up paths we'll send you down. Some of them are more frictionless, some of them have a bit more friction, and it just kind of depends on the facts and the confidence we have in the information we collect from you during the sign-up process.
A related question, when you were answering that, you mentioned Wells Fargo, you mentioned MasterCard, obviously BILT, Prove. When thinking about it more holistically from a partnership side and working with these various different partners, does, say, a MasterCard or Wells Fargo need to understand who Prove is when you're putting some of this together and you're working with these various different partners, and kind of where things sit and kind of who has to have an understanding of what? If there's a young fintech on the line, and they're thinking, all right, I might want to look at this, but I also work with, this bank and that partner, kind of how do you guys think about that? Or is it an individual partnership and some of the other stuff doesn't come into play?
Yeah, so in the case of Prove, we use Prove across our business. So it is, if you want to sign up for a BILT account, you can live at one of our BILT properties. Anyone can go get a BILT loyalty account, and there's a variety of different functions, ways to earn points, services, and features you can get access to for free. So we use Prove across our business, and we use that to kind of validate identities, prevent fraud, and improve the sign-up experience. So because of that, while any of our partnerships and any of our relationships, especially with major companies like a MasterCard and a Wells Fargo, they expect to understand everything about you, and we have spent lots and lots of time with them, and lots of what we do, or pretty much anything we do, they scrutinize and think hard about, and as they should spend a lot of time thinking about. But in the case of Prove, we use it across the business, so it's not specific to any one partner. It's not specific to the card, and it's really kind of a BILT implementation.
I would just add to that. We work with 8 out of the 10 big banks. And so I'm not sure what I can or can't name, but we work with a lot of the big guys. And so they would already have familiarity with the business. And it's, as anyone who's ever worked with some of these big companies or works for these big companies, you go through a ton of rigor, right? Getting through the lawyers, compliance teams. And so I think while that could be like a death sentence to a lot of startups, right? To go and work with a lot of these big guys, because Proof started in that space, I think it made us a lot more robust and know what the kinds of things they're looking for and what we need to do and what kind of an infrastructure we have to build to make sure we pass their sniff test.
So we're kind of shifting our conversation here. And if the audience, again, if you have questions, please feel free. But now kind of, looking forward a little bit, Brandt, if we talked, if there's others listening to the call, they might be thinking of moving in a direction like this, what are some actionable steps that you might recommend, if someone were thinking about, an onboarding, technology and onboarding partner like Prove, and how that process might benefit them?
Yeah. So we've had a terrific experience with Prove. It continues to be a major pillar of our sign-up process. Like I said, it's been helpful both from fraud prevention and from customer experience. I certainly recommend hearing the full Prove spiel, and you're getting a taste of it today, but spend time with the team. We found the process to both be really insightful, and they did a good job answering a whole bunch of nitty-gritty questions and everything you'll care about, and quite used to, as Nicole mentioned, getting those questions, because they deal with many large players who ask everything you could imagine. So we found that quite useful, even just in the evaluation process and learning process. I think, like I said, for us, especially with certain products that we have that are very prone to fraud, having a fraud solution, an incremental fraud solution, paid for itself and makes a lot of sense. So for us, there was a clear and easy business case. And you see a lot of the folks, in the credit card space, in financial services broadly, use Prove for that reason, or as one of the reasons. But I think there's, it sort of depends on where you're coming from and what you're looking for and how big is fraud for you. But I would think long and hard about it, because there are benefits on both sides of fraud reduction and customer experience improvement.
One question I find myself asking more when it comes to speaking to a fraud or fraud related topics is, fraudsters are pretty open in terms of their collaboration amongst one another. It's whether it's on Reddit boards or Twitter or other social platforms. If they feel as if they've made a score, I'm sure they're going to share that with their friends and their other fraudsters. Do you think, and feel free to either of you answering this, do you think there's enough sharing amongst the good actors in the space, whether it be fintechs, financial services firms, in terms of trends and things that you're seeing that can help cut down on fraud? Because as we've talked about here today, fraud is not just a one solution type of problem to deal with. It's a holistic problem.
Nicole, do you want to go, or you want?
I can jump in. I mean, I actually think it's a great point. I think it is probably, things like this who can bring us together in forums and like sessions of what you talked about that actually bring some fraud leaders together. Probably, I don't know, ones I've seen probably aren't online, right? To just have some of those conversations. And also there's probably more of a need, right? Just to make sure we're sharing trends and And seeing companies like ours, when we see a threat or we see something happening in one space, we can quickly try to mitigate and roll that out to all of our customers. But I think it's a great point, Todd. And I think that we need to have more and more conversations to make sure we're sharing best practices.
Yeah. I think I think there is sharing. I wish there were more. There have been some big steps across the industry. So, Social Security Administration of Government has taken an important role in rolling out tools that allow you to combat certain types of fraud. Some of their recent developments have allowed big financial institutions to crack down on synthetic identity fraud, as an example. So there have been really big strides as a result of that type of collaboration, and in many cases, government involvement or help to drive that collaboration. I think that the challenge will always be, everyone who's combating fraud wants to stop it. And I don't think anyone feels too territorial about, hey, this is my special sauce and I get to stop this fraud and everyone else can suffer from it. That's none of us approach it in that way in the industry. We'd love to stop it from everyone. I think, the reason the Reddit boards and such don't exist on the other side is if you put your recipe out there, it also makes it easier for the fraudsters to get around it. And so there's certainly a balance, but I think there could be more industry collaboration. And there's certain companies, by the way, that are, doing this, are at the forefront of this and are best positioned to do this. So I think, Nicole, you said you came from FIS before this, some of the processors, some of the networks, folks who see, across institutions, some of the fraud prevention services that are seeing a lot, are well positioned as we go forward to use data across the industry to help, identify devices or identities or whatever that may be compromised or may be, higher risk.
Nicole, I'll leave you with the final word. Any final thoughts or comments as we wrap up here, either on fraud or the partnership with BILT? What are some final thoughts?
Yeah. So first of all, thanks a lot for having us, and great questions, by the way. You have a smart audience here. Really good questions, really thoughtful questions. Appreciate the opportunity. I think, as I mentioned earlier, what I'm excited about next is really the opportunities to take these strong binding events and really turn them into passwordless. I'm as equally passionate about fraud and identity as I am about shopping. And so I want to see it on both sides, right? I want to see these kind of great experiences, pop up. And we all know when we see those great experiences, right? Of just things that make it really easy to log in, sign up, pay for something, apply for something. And so I'm excited about that for me as a shopper and for me as someone in fraud and identity.
All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. Nicole, thank you very much. Brandt, thank you. As Nicole said, thank you to our audience and your great questions. Special thanks to the team at Prove for their continued support. If you want to check out our upcoming sessions, just check out fintechnexus.com. We have upcoming webinars as well as in-person events, both in Miami coming up in early February, as well as New York, May 10th and 11th, our big show of the year, 4,000 plus people, Fintech Nexus USA. Brandt, Nicole, thanks again. Thank you to our audience. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
Thanks so much, Todd. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.